So that's one phase of what's going on in this country. But what people are starting to face is the enormous expense, which is equal to or greater than the state hospital system, of effecting, constructing, and maintaining a complete outpatient system for the chronically mentally ill. And that one of the biggest stumbling blocks means housing for them all. Now, many of these folks are homeless. They are still so disturbed at a functional level that they have to be cared for in 24-hour supervised settings. They cannot be cared for largely by their families, so that's not an option. We also have really a large population of patients who are older, geriatric patients and older middle-aged patients, which make up probably at least a third of the patient population. Those folks need a little bit more care, as you might assume. But in any case, all these folks need an array of services that have to be placed around them, round the clock. They also have to have the same hospital services, medical health care on a routine basis, routine psychiatric care. And states are grappling with this because they realize now that there's no way of avoiding the cost whatsoever. And if they don't do this, they're going to be in legal trouble in more ways than I care to count. Federal DOJ lawsuits galore, and the other social problems that we're facing now, the poor jails in this country are filled with the mentally ill. Many places have approximately about 25%, just for a sort of overall average figure, of all their inmates are chronically mentally ill. I read a newspaper article, courtesy of my sister, who lives in Houston, that Harris County Jail several years ago suddenly realized that of its 9,000 or so inmates, 2,800 were chronically mentally ill and needed ongoing, day-to-day, week-to-week, regular psychiatric treatment, observation, maintenance, and regulation, special care, segregation, but not segregation into a solo cell or things like that that you usually think of, but into hospital-like units. They also only had 3 psychiatrists to care for 2,800 patients. So suddenly they went from a staff of 3 psychiatrists and a few physician extenders in the psychiatric behavioral sciences to, I think it was 15 psychiatrists and 58 psychiatric physician extenders. And that's going on all over the country. Now, the consequence of it is it's busting wide open the budgets of the small and large jails. It's just overwhelming them. And counties now are finding that they're having to spend bigger and bigger chunks of money every year on the mentally ill in their own jails. And then we have the issue of people who are acutely ill stuck in emergency rooms all over the country, big communities, little communities, you name it, North Dakota to Florida, waiting for days to weeks to even over a month for a treatment bed slot to open up anywhere in their state. And then the third place and problem area that's much more visible is the homeless, mentally ill on the streets. The fourth thing that we have now that is kind of controversial because it's not really clear that it's true the way it's being portrayed in the media is that we keep having now our current fad, and I apologize for the use of the word because it almost minimizes what's going on and how serious it is, but the wave of mass shootings that have started in the last 10 years or so since Columbine and a few before Columbine, if you look at the history of mass shootings closely. But the mentally ill are unfairly and too frequently being quickly attributed as the perpetrators of this, whereas they really are a much different kind of person, even beginning with Charles Whitman at the University of Texas in Austin in August 1966, when he shot and killed 14 people from the tower on the University of Texas Austin campus. Now, he had a brain tumor. We just don't know what happened, but he had no history of mental illness. He was kind of an Eagle Scout kind of person, and then all of a sudden he gathered ammunition and a bunch of guns, hauled a trunk up the stairs to the tower, and started firing away for hours until the city police finally overcame and had to shoot him to death in the tower to stop it. But the damage was done by that. Now, he's sort of an open question, but we do have some clear examples that stick in the public's mind, like Mr. Ferguson, who on a Long Island or whatever railway it was outside that went out of New York City, who killed 7 or 9 people with a semi-automatic pistol, and clearly was psychotic but got life in prison. He's kind of the exception to the rule, because most shooters, even the fellow who shot at the congressman practicing on the ball field, was not mentally ill. These are angry loners who largely have lost everything, who are bitter, who blame somebody, the government, whoever, and then they go really kind of loco would be my word. They go to the highest level of anger imaginable. Or the second type is the controlling, abusive, paranoid loner, can't really sustain a relationship, but is very controlling with their wife. The wife takes it as long as she can, then separates and leaves him, and he shoots her and anybody around her. And we had a good example of that, unfortunately, a couple of years ago up in either Minnesota or Wisconsin, where the wife was in the hairdressing studio and he marches in with a rifle and kills her and 3 other people. And mistakenly, the public nearby and first responders thought that the incident was in the local mall right across the street, shut down the mall, and went through the usual routine of evacuating everybody until they found the bodies in the beauty shop just across the street. So that's kind of another problem that we have. And there are a few mentally ill folks who commit violent crimes, and every time one of them happens, we've got sort of a story of lack of outpatient care in the background, because our systems are still evolving in place as states all over the country work feverishly to find funding, to set up structures, to recruit staff, and that's another problem. We have an enormous shortage of several of the professions in mental health, from substance abuse counselors to psychiatrists. Now, I'm a child psychiatrist, and there are only about 7,300 of us. Just a few years ago, more of us were retiring and dying than were being replaced every year, so it was a real crisis. Now, at this point, I would like to wind down and thank you for your listening again, and let you know in a sort of a preview that in the future I'm going to start to focus on the revolution that's occurring in the mental health reform effort nationwide, focusing on many states' different kinds of efforts as examples to try to educate you on not only what is needed, but what is being done, and still looking at some states, well, more than a few states, more than some states, that are having a terrible time facing up to this issue for not only economic reasons, political reasons, all kinds of reasons that you can think of, to what the task is. And I can't fault them for it, really, because it's an enormous social revolution, one of the biggest that we have undertaken in modern times. And it's not easy. It's not going away. It's not going to go away. And it's going to be very expensive. It's certainly not going to be on the magnitude of redoing the infrastructure in our country, but it's going to be something that every state is going to be pressed to fund. And that's a question that I would like to leave everyone with. Unfortunately, it's going to require increase in revenue stream, and that means taxes. And since the Reagan years, we have been living under this mistaken dream that we can expand this and that and build and develop and do this and that without raising taxes. And that's just not true. And the mental health needs of this country and everywhere else in the Western world is following the same pattern. The mentally ill are with us. They are not going away. They constitute a certain constant percentage of the population. This is a genetic group of diseases just like diabetes, hypertension, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, heart disease that are always going to be with us and afflicting a certain number of us, no matter what. It's going to require care. Care costs money. And it's not going to go away. It's always going to be there, and we're going to have to face up to our responsibilities and figure out a way to fund it among our other many obligations. I'm confident that we can do it. There are certainly states and regions within states that are already doing a creditable job. It's not easy, but they have found creative ways to do it. And the ethos that we have of do not raise taxes at any cost is going to have to be modified, if not abandoned, and rethought in this country for correction in this realm at least. Now, there are many other realms that kind of in the same shape, but if we can change the way we run our country, especially compared to the last 20 years or so, I'm confident we can get these things done. I thank you again for listening to my crude podcast, which doesn't have music introductions and outros and all the other frills. And as I figure out the mystic arcane arts of audio recording and spiffing up and podcasting, that'll change, but it'll probably take time because I I'm a